Sometimes it's just important to sit in deep truths of God's love and permanence and the security that he brings. And music is a wonderful way for us to do that. Some of us don't always know exactly what to do in those times. Generally, it's about relaxing, being yourself, putting yourself in a posture of prayer. If you were to think you're coming to a place of prayer with God and talking to him, how would you hold yourself? And so it's just being in that place. I felt like it was an important thing to do today, just to have a bit more time in that than we might usually do, particularly just thinking of how John is and wanting to give space for us to still ourselves, because when we can still and understand and settle ourselves, we're in a place where we can express more freely to God what is on our heart to express. And so I want you to be free to do that for him. We are in our series, just before we do that, Kids Life. We've got no kids in the room, so Kids Life is happening up there, that's why. In our series, Faith-Filled Ways, so today we're looking at Matthew 6:19 to 24. We're moving it around a little bit because I have been reserving the Lord's Prayer for John, and hopefully he will be back. So page 16, if you're taking notes, is where we are today, thinking about the way of kingdom priority. We've been looking at Jesus' teaching here, and largely Jesus' teaching through this section has been about righteousness. And if you've been here, hopefully you've got a better grasp in terms of what righteousness means. Righteousness is always about right relationship. And so God's concern in this world is how we live in right relationship to one another and how we live in right relationship to him. This is what he is concerned about for us. And so this is what Jesus is talking about. And Jesus has been, particularly in this section we've been thinking about, warning people not to practice their righteousness or certain acts of righteousness, certain acts that establish and maintain right relationship with others and with God in front of other people in order to be seen by them. So he's said this at the beginning of this section: beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them, for then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. And then he's talked about these are some of the practices that are the normal cultural Jewish practices of righteousness and how to express that right relationship through giving and through prayer and through fasting, which we've looked at over the last couple of weeks. And today he moves beyond this, but he ties in the same themes in what he's talking about. And this is what he says: do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And so I just want us to think about these three sections. I'm going to step through talking about treasure, talking about the eye, and talking about the master, to understand what Jesus is helping us to see in this section. Treasure is really about the accumulation of earthly wealth as an ultimate security, which he's talking about here. The problem that Jesus is pointing out is that treasure doesn't provide that security that it promises, the earthly treasures. The treasures that he's talking about specifically here in that context are things that get eaten by moths, things that can be eaten by rats if they're stored away, and things that can be stolen by thieves. It's things like clothes, it's food that is kept and hoarded, it is the money to help us to live, but when that's held onto, then thieves can steal that. And instead, he says, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And I think it's important for us to understand what Jesus is saying here, because I don't know if it's always what we have in mind when he says something like this. When Jesus says, lay up yourselves treasures in heaven, he's not talking about a kind of heavenly bank account that we deposit into the future, that one day when we when we die and get to the age to come, we will draw down from that account. I think that he's talking about things here and now. In order for us to understand this, we need to understand a Jewish cosmology and a Jewish understanding of the way that the universe works and fits together in their minds. They're not thinking about this scientifically like we are today. We're thinking about how this works in terms of God being the Lord of all. So this is a picture of something of their understanding of the way that the universe is put together. We've got the earth down there, which we understand. They thought that the sky was then held up by the mountains. So the mountains are the place where the heavens and the earth meet. So they're pillars of the sky. And then above the sky area, they would think of as the first heavens. It's the vault of heaven. This is the skies. Above that, they thought that there was water, where it's space. It's dark blue at night and it's light blue in the day. It's water above the sky. And so they thought there was water there. And then above that is the dwelling place of God, the heaven. And so in their understanding, if you look up, you're looking up at the heavens. You're looking up at the sky where the birds are and the sun is. And then you're looking beyond that into space, into the heavens. And this is their understanding of the heavens. All of that space is space that we do not rule. We do not have access to. The earth is the place where humans have been given the authority to rule. The heavens is the place where God's rule is. You could, and some people do, translate heavens in this as simply as skies. You could think about this as skies. So Jesus is saying, do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth where can get eaten and stolen. Lay up for yourself treasures in the skies. And so you say, well, what would he mean by laying up for yourself treasures in the skies? He would mean for you to think, what is it that God values? Under God's larger rule, how do we invest in things that God cares about? And so what has he actually given us this earth for? What is the purpose of us living here, and what is his interest? What does he actually treasure here? And if we think about that, we're thinking that God treasures things like people. He treasures relationship being right between people. He treasures the poor being cared for. He treasures justice. He treasures compassion toward one another. He treasures mercy being shown. These are the types of things that God treasures. So we're saying, don't try to hold on to things that you can't hold on to, but hold on to the things that God most cares about. Make them your priority here. These actually become things that last then beyond this life as well, into that age to come. The problem that Jesus is pointing out is that treasures on earth don't provide the security that they promise. You all know people who are wealthier than you but are miserable. They don't provide what they promise. But there's also a deeper problem that Jesus points out here, And that is, he says, that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That what is most important to you is a warning, because your heart will follow that. What you do with your possessions will reveal what you depend upon. And accumulation becomes a way of protecting ourselves from the ache of dependence, which says that if I have enough, I'll be safe. If I have enough, I'll be okay. Jesus here, when he's talking about this, he's addressing people who are not particularly wealthy, most of them, you would think. These are people who are under Roman taxation. Many of them under economic oppression. There's social anxiety. And in this place, we can easily become tempted, like them, to secure ourselves through wealth. We live in an area where this is how you secure yourself, through wealth and education. I don't think that Jesus is condemning wealth here. He's not condemning saving. He's not saying that you shouldn't have money. What he's saying is that there's an impulse in a human to grasp for self-sufficiency, to say, I got this for myself, and so I hold on to it to protect myself. He's probably reminding the Jewish people of what God said to them through Moses in Deuteronomy, when God had led them into the promised land, give them everything they needed, and God warns them. He says this, when you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. He says, be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I'm giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you've got everything you need, when you build your fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud and you'll forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. He's saying, don't forget where this wealth comes from. Don't forget who's given it to you. Look up to the heavens and recognize you're not in control. And think about, what does he intend for this? And so I think it prompts questions for us, like, in what ways are my treasures leading me to forget God's provision? Or in what ways are my management of my treasures maintaining justice and right relationship, or preventing justice and right relationship? How does my use of my resources care for the poor or not care for the poor? This is treasure. Jesus then goes on and talks about the eye. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Using an eye here really as in a metaphor is like this lamp for the body. It's a doorway into our inner life. So you look through the eye and you see the inner life of a person. The idiom of the eye is a Hebrew idiom that's used fairly regularly, and it often refers to generosity, like in Proverbs here. The generous person, it literally says the good eye person, will be blessed. For he shares his bread with the poor. The good eye means they're generous, that you do something good to help other people. Whereas an evil eye means you're greedy, envious, stingy. This is the exact idiom that Jesus is using here. Healthy eye is generous. It's got this single-hearted vision to do the works of God. The bad eye is grievous and darkened. You can see this good eye versus bad eye in one of the earliest stories in the Hebrew text. In the garden in Eden, God had filled everything, and everything was pronounced as being good. And up to this point in the story, the first humans, Adam and Eve, had seen the world through their trust in God's goodness. They knew God was good. They experienced him as good. They saw what he had given was good. And it was undivided. It was unguarded, the way that they looked at the world. But the serpent comes into the garden and reframes their reality, changes the way that they see what they have. And this serpent shifts their perception. He teaches them to fix their eyes on the one thing that God had said don't eat. And that's what they do. This is the turning point of the entire narrative. It comes through the eye. Through seeing things different, the eye becomes an instrument of misdirected desire. This is what we're told. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit and ate. And the man and his wife hid themselves. You see this pattern. Saw, desired, took, hid. The core lie, they believe, is that they must secure their own lives because God is withholding from them. And this is a pattern that you see play out over and over through the scriptures, through the story, that there's this idea that God might be withholding, and so I have to secure things for myself. And so the way that we begin to see the world becomes corrupted, and it begins to focus on the wrong things, and people grasp for themselves and then put themselves up as being good for what they're doing. This kind of seeing and desiring and taking and hiding is something that the Jewish prophets speak about. Isaiah speaks about it here in Isaiah 5. He says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and shrewd in their own sight." He's speaking about corrupt and the corrupt ruling class, basically, who exploit the poor, distort justice, and confuse the moral categories to justify their own gain. They literally redefine good and evil to protect their own wealth and status. Greed is reframed for them as prosperity. Oh, God's just prospered us, but actually it's greed that's driving that. They call it savvy leadership, but it's actually just perpetuating injustice. They talk about it as security, but it's actually oppressing other people. It's not too dissimilar to what we see today at a corporate level in our own society. You can think of it as a downfall of capitalism, but it was present in the Jewish cultures as well. And we see it at a corporate level, and we need to be aware of this. Up until last year, Woolworths was the single largest owner of poker machines in Australia. They had more than any casino operator or club network, the ownership of poker machines. And they have since divested. They've gotten out of poker machines. They're entirely out of them now. They've set up another company who's taken over all those poker machines, And we say, oh, that's good. It's good that they're out. It is. But the reason they got out was because of the public backlash, which is good, which impacted what they saw as impacting their potential profits and their reputation as Australia's fresh food people. This is the type of thing that Jesus is talking about. We have companies in Australia who promote themselves as a national icon of trust, of safety and of pride, the spirit of Australia, while at the same time they are involved in behaviours that may benefit shareholders and the profits of the company, but disadvantage customers and staff. They claim record profits after years of taxpayer support. And they say this is because of our strong management. Maybe they need to think about deeper questions of what is right and fair. We look at our banking system, and where there is predatory lending, fee structures, they get renamed as innovative financial products. People who aren't able to discern get sucked into these. Profit becomes spoken, this is the good, the profit is the good. And moral accountability just disappears because we're getting returns for our shareholders. So if you want to be part of the profit, become a shareholder. In September this year, ANZ agreed to pay a record $240 million fine in penalties after they admitted widespread misconduct in their systems. $240 million is a big fine, isn't it? Their half-yearly profit to March this year was $3.5 billion. $240 million fine, sure, we'll take that. The eye is the lamp of the body. We need to learn to see right, see what God cares about. Because Jesus says no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Mammon is often translated money in our translations, fair enough, I think. But I think it's also helpful to have mammon there. Mammon comes from the root word trust. Mammon is that in which one puts trust. And providing security for ourselves through our possessions is where many people put their trust. Mammon is the modern fruit of Eden's tree. Jesus is naming this impulse to provide for ourselves through our possessions. It's not just money, but it's this accumulated trust in material control, controlling our lives through what we have. And so it's kind of personified as this rival God that provides safety for us. And Jesus is saying you can't hold trust both in that to provide you safety and for God to provide you safety. One will erode the other. If you foster the trust in God, then it'll erode the trust in the mammon. But if you foster the trust in the mammon, it'll erode the trust in God. And so he's calling for a different vision here. He's calling for us to see everything that God gives in creation as a gift, not as a security project. To recognize he's the giver, to trust him for it. It doesn't mean that we won't be given a lot. If you are living in this area, many of us have been given a very lot. I don't think there's any condemnation from God for that. He's the giver. The question is, how do we cultivate a life that trusts him when we do have a lot? How do we cultivate this sight that sees the world through God's provision, that frees us from the anxious grasp of accumulation? This is what Jesus is trying to do. It's trying to free us from this grasp. That's why in the passage that comes next, he's talking about don't be anxious about these things. Do you know who this is? Fairly famous guy. If you don't know who he is, then you've used his products. There's no one in the world who hasn't, really. Well, not in the Western world, in the wealthy world. A few months ago, if you saw that he said that he intends to give away most of his wealth in his lifetime. The next 40 years, I think he intends to give away his entire wealth. I think probably Donald Trump's decision to withdraw aid has prompted some of that, to say he needs to provide aid for people who don't know, but he's got a huge trust fund, that foundation that provides care for the vulnerable. And in this article I was reading, he was talking about how his children, this is Bill Gates, sorry, by the way, if you didn't know, Microsoft, his children will get less than 1% of his wealth. He'll give them less than 1%. And you're like, oh, that doesn't sound like very much. Well, he is worth about $180 billion, so 1.8 billion each, that's probably all right. But he's thinking about what he has been given and what he can do with that. And children might expect to receive the wealth as a security from their parents. And Bill's thought about this with his ex-wife now, Melinda, thought about this, how they're going to use what they have been given, recognizing that they really don't deserve it. It was really very lucky for him to have discovered this thing that has become the thing that everybody used. A lot of hard work, sure, yeah. But there's recognition from him that it's not of him. He said this, he said, you don't want your kids to ever be confused about your support for them and your love for them. So I do think explaining early on your philosophy, that you're going to treat them all equally and you're going to give them incredible opportunities, but that the highest calling for these resources is to go back to the neediest. And I think it's a really strong statement from him, that the highest calling for his resources isn't to further his family dynasty. The highest calling is to care for the neediest. I kind of did some looking up to see, is Bill Christian? Like, where does this come from? He's got some church upbringing, but calls himself an agnostic now, as far as I can see. His ex-wife grew up in Catholic church. But he has, whether or not he knows Jesus, whether or not he knows God, I think that he's a good example here of what it means to invest in the heavens. What does God care about? God cares about using your wealth for the poor, to help people, to show his love, to spread the message of hope that he brings. This is God's concern in the world. And a man who isn't quite sure whether God exists or who this God is a good example to us of what that can be like. Let's pray. Father, there are some in this room that are anxious about money because we don't know how to pay the bills in this next month. We ask for your provision as a good Father. There are some in this room that are anxious about money because we think that it provides us security that we need. Help us to trust you as a good Father. There are some who are anxious about money because we want to trust you, and we don't know exactly what that means. Help us to be freed from those anxieties, to turn to you, to share with you what's going on, and to step by step walk with you as you lead and guide us. We invite you into this area in our life. We invite you into the area of our possessions. Would you bring light to our body as you look through our eyes and as you reveal stuff to us? Bring light to us. And as we learn to look out on this world in the way that you look out on it, would you bring freedom to many through us? We thank you for your provision. We trust you, God.